For those new to programming, I suggest that you start at the beginning of the series. The playlist will be linked in the description of the video and also in the YouTube cards in the top right corner. With that out of the way, let's get started with today's topic, which is for loops. Loops are a fundamental part of programming and they are used to execute a statement or a block of code repeatedly until a specified condition returns false. Now, to give more context as to why you need to repeatedly execute a piece of code, let's go back to the RPG analogy and think about the inventory system in your game. Now, let's say that the inventory system is slot based and your bag has 10 slots, which are stackable up to 99 items per slot, which means that you can store 990 items in the bag at the maximum. I hope that you are clear till now. Now, let's say that the player is playing the game and has items inside his inventory, with some items being stackable while some not being stackable. What we need to do now is show these items correctly to the player when he or she opens the inventory. That is, if the items are not stackable, then we show them unstacked, while if they are stackable, then we show them as stacked, with the number of the stacked items shown in the top right corner of the slot. This sort of scenario is pretty common in an RPG game, and is one of the scenarios where you'd be using loops. Now, the syntax of the for loop can be divided into 5 parts. First is for and the two parentheses, which tells the compiler that you are writing the for loop. Next, inside the parentheses, we have the initializer, and it is used to initialize a variable that will be local to the for loop and cannot be accessed outside the loop. Next is the condition, which will return either true or false. If the condition returns true, then the program will execute the loop again, while if the condition returns false, the loop will be stopped and the program will move forward. Then we have the iterator, which will let you iterate the loop variable after the code block has been executed. And finally, we have everything inside the curly braces, which is the block of code that will be executed repeatedly while the condition for the for loop returns true. Now, we are not going to write the whole inventory system in this video, but what we are going to do instead is write a block of code which will test our logic. So first of all, let's write a simple for loop to debug.log the names of all the items in the inventory. To do this, let's first initialize a string array named _item names that will contain the names of the items in the inventory. Private string array _item names equal to new string opening bracket phi closing bracket, and then inside the curly braces sword apple potion dagger semicolon. Then in the start method, let's write a for loop by typing for opening bracket int I equal to 0 semicolon I is less than _item names dot length semicolon I plus plus, and then inside the curly braces debug.log item plus I plus colon plus _item names I semicolon. Now let's break down this piece of code. Here we are initializing a new local variable I and setting its value to 0. Then we wrote a condition, which is that the newly initialized I is less than _item names dot length, which is phi. And after that, in the iterator, we increase the value of I by 1 after each loop cycle. This means that the code will start with I set to 0 and will loop 5 times until the iterator increases the value of I to phi, which will result into the condition returning false because we have set the condition as I should be less than _item names dot length, which is phi, and phi is not less than phi. And when the condition returns false, the loop will be stopped. Inside the code block, with each loop cycle, we have debug.log the value at different indexes of _item names array. So when we go to Unity, we should see the logs inside the console saying item 0 something, item 1 something, to item 4 something. Now let's go to Unity and check the logs. As you can see, it displays all the 5 items correctly. Back to the code. Now let's declare another array, but this time of data type boolean. named underscore is stackable. With size of the array equal to 5 and set the members to false, true, 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 false. And then modify this piece of code so that it will debug.log names of stackable and non-stackable items separately. So to accomplish this, what we need to do is inside the for loop, we will create an if statement like this with the condition underscore is stackable I equal to false and debug.log item plus I plus is not stackable, comma name colon plus underscore item names I, and attach an else if block with the condition underscore is stackable I equal to true and debug.log item plus I plus is stackable, comma name colon plus underscore item names I, and that's it. Now let's go to Unity and check the logs. And as you can see, it divided the items based on whether they are stackable or not stackable. Back to the code. Now just to give a heads up, as most of the viewers are beginners to programming, it is possible that some of you might get lost in the next part, as the code is going to get a little bit larger than in the previous videos, about 90 to 100 lines. But don't rush it. If you understand everything that I'm doing, then great. If not, then don't worry. Just stick around as I'll slowly explain everything. The reason why I'm writing this relatively large piece of code to explain for loops is because I don't want to give you a senseless example with no context, like just iterating a value of I or making a pattern with stars or that sort of thing that would be of no use to you. But instead, explain it from a perspective of real life problem solving, using only the things that I've made videos about until now, which I think is a much better way of explaining any concept. And the second thing is that I want you to get used to seeing large pieces of code, because if you are serious about developing a game, then you will be dealing with thousands of lines of code in each script. Another point I want to say is that the length of code is of little importance, and what you should be focusing on instead is understanding the problems that you are trying to solve and the underlying system that you are creating to solve it. That is why I have been creating these scenarios to get you into the perspective of solving problems instead of just typing a plus b equal to magic. Well, with that out of the way, let's continue. Now, the purpose of the code that we are writing is to display the items in form of stacks, with the right amount of stacked value assigned to the slot. To accomplish this, what we need to do is declare two more arrays. First, a string array named underscore inventory item names. And second, an integer array named underscore stacked item count. Underscore inventory item names will contain the names of the stacked items, and underscore stacked item count will contain the stacked item values for the item in the inventory item names array. Now, in the start method, before the for loop, we will initialize these two arrays like this using the length property. We are doing this using the length property because we know that even if none of the items are stackable, the members needed to contain all the members of the item names array will not be larger than the size of the item names array. Instead of referencing using the length property, you can also try hard coding this instead, but it will be really difficult to maintain it once your project starts getting even a little large. So just don't hard code it. Moving forward, I only declared the array and did not initialize it above is because we would get an error saying that a field initializer cannot reference a non-static field, method, or property. And as we are trying to use the length property of the arrays, which is not a static property, we can't initialize the arrays above. Next, inside the for loop, we have already made the if condition that separates the stackable and non-stackable items. So inside the first conditional block, where the non-stackable items will go, what we have to do is add this incoming non-stackable item to the underscore inventory item names array, and at the same index set the number of stacked items in the stacked item counts array. We can do this by creating a nested for loop to go through the underscore inventory item names array and find the index at which we have not stored an item yet, by creating an if condition where we are checking the value at the current index and seeing if it's null like this. If the condition returns true, that means that we have found an empty slot, and the next thing is to assign the value of the current item iterating in the larger for loop to the empty slot that we have just found by typing underscore inventory item names j equal to underscore item names I. And after that, setting the underscore stacked item count at index j to 1, as even though this item cannot be stacked, your item count can't be 0 because the item does exist. Next, we need to add break because we want to assign this item only to the first empty slot that we find in the underscore inventory item names array, and not to all the empty slots that we find. And to stop that from happening, after we have set the values correctly in the first empty slot, we need to break the for loop and get out of it. With that done, now let's move on to the else if code block where the stackable items will enter. Now inside here, the first thing we need to do is declare a variable named underscore found identical item and set it to false. After that, we'll create a for loop and iterate through the underscore inventory item names array to find if an identical item already exists in the array. If such an identical item exists, then we'll set the underscore found identical item boolean to true and increase the underscore stacked item count variable by 1 at the index that we found the identical item. With that done, after the for loop, we will check if underscore found identical item is false. If this returns true, it means that we went through all the items in the underscore inventory item names array and did not find a single identical item, which means that we will need to find an empty slot and assign the currently iterating item of underscore item names array to it, just like we did above. So instead of writing the code again, let's just copy and paste that piece of code here like this. And with that, we have completed the code that will take the items from underscore item names array and use the underscore stackable array to stack the items correctly, and then place them inside the inventory item names array and set the correct stack item count in the underscore stacked item count array. Now the final thing we need to do is to debug.log the correctly stacked items in the Unity console. So let's do that. To do this, we'll need to create another for loop inside the start method right after the largest for loop ends. And inside it, create an if condition which will not print the item slots that are empty by typing if underscore inventory item names I is not equal to null, then debug.log item plus I plus colon plus underscore inventory item names I, and then debug.log item count like this: item count colon plus underscore stacked item count I. And finally, the code for today's video is complete. Now let's go to Unity and check the logs. As you can see, our items were stacked correctly based on the data inside the underscore stackable array. Now, if this was a legit project, then I would not use arrays to store this sort of data. Instead, what I would be doing is that I'd probably create a struct or a class that will contain stats of these items and then use dictionaries to maintain this sort of data. Using dictionaries will make your life much easier, but that's a topic for another video. Now let me talk about a couple more things before wrapping this video up. First is that you can initialize more than one local variable in the initializer section of the for loop by separating the declarations with comma. Second is that the control variable, which is the variable that you are using to control the condition of the for loop, can be of any numeric data type, such as short, int, float, double, decimal, etc. Third is that in this video, we have looped in the positive direction from 0 to the length of the array. But you can also loop in the reverse direction by iterating the control variable negatively. For example, you can first set I to the length of the array and then set the condition as I is greater than or equal to 0, and then iterate using I minus minus or I equal to I minus 2 or whatever you want instead of I plus plus. And the final thing is that just like you can initialize multiple variables in the initializer section, you can also iterate multiple variables in whatever direction that you want in the iterator section. Well, that does it for today's video. If you like the content, I hope that you'll subscribe to the channel. Do comment below whether you like me writing these larger code examples or not. And again, if you see someone struggling down in the comment section, do try and help them. Goodbye for now. This is your host VP signing off.